Good evening and welcome. This is a School District of Prescott Board of Education special meeting. I'll call this meeting to order. Subject Section 1983 Wisconsin statutes. Our first item is to adopt the agenda. Dr. Spikuza, are there any changes?
No changes from administration.
Okay.
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that carries. We'll do item 3, Pledge of Allegiance. Vicki, would you care to lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll move on to item 4, recognition of visitors. Anybody in the audience going to be recognized? Okay.
Surprising, huh? Ken Anderson. I live in Clifton Township. I have 5 kids with my wife Holly here in the audience, and 2 have graduated, 3 are still in the school district. Good evening. I would ask that this board and this district start to once again focus on educating our kids and stop trying to be health advisors and a health safety board. You need to focus on the number 0. 0. According to today's numbers from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, without comorbidity, 0 children in Wisconsin have died from COVID. There have been a total of 3 children in all of Wisconsin who have died with COVID, and this is of course tragic. Yet, all 3 had severe pre-existing conditions that are listed as comorbidity. 0 kids ages 0 to 19 in Wisconsin have died of COVID alone. 0. Yet tragically, our community has had children die of things other than COVID. Is the school doing anything to solve these? If kids get sick with COVID, kids recover. Many of these kids would not even have known they were infected or became cases without being tested. 0. The school nurse has 0 authority to diagnose any student illness, yet you have given her the authority to make kids stay at home for 10 days unless they are subjected to a COVID test or pay to see a doctor and get an alternative diagnosis. 0. The number of Prescott varsity football players who had to follow this same protocol to play football last Friday, after over a dozen of them were sick during that same week. Are we following the same protocol for everyone? 0 chance. 0. The number of people who wear face coverings everywhere outside of this building after they have stood in front of this board demanding that other people wear masks within it. 0. The number of students who wear masks in school by choice whose parents come in front of this board and ask that all kids are forced to wear masks. 0. The number of people who are fitted, trained, and follow proper protocol to properly wear a face covering that can provide minuscule protection against viral infection. 0. The number of people who talk about the fact that the eyes and ears are also gateways to viral infection. Covering 2 of the 4 gateways with cloth masks does 0 good in actually protecting anybody. 0. The vaccine does not protect people from getting or spreading the virus. Children already do not show serious symptoms, and this is now stated cause for getting a vaccine. You ask, what does this have to do with 0? The vaccine status of any student or staff member is 0 your business. 0. There is 0 liability to the school district for anyone catching COVID, as there is a 0% chance anyone could prove they were infected at the school, unless there are mandates from the government unless there are mandates from the government that force you to act and you do not follow, there is 0 liability. You seriously need to take a hands-off approach, because if you do not, there is also a 0 chance that you will not be fighting litigation. If you continue, I lost my spot there. If you continue to step on our rights, we have a very powerful legal defense organization that has almost unlimited resources standing by, waiting for decisions that trample our rights to be put into action, and then we will litigate to the fullest. 0. If you are truly concerned about children's health and believe that COVID is such a big threat to the well-being of students, it makes absolutely 0 sense that you then want every citizen who feels sick to come into our schools for testing. Are you serious about this? How does your brain justify this line of thinking? For convenience? Do you want to bring every sick person in our community into our school for COVID testing so as not to inconvenience those who may become another case for your numbers? Maybe we should have them stay at the nursing home for a day or two before we test them. Bottom line, you need to focus on educating our kids and making up for the deficiencies in education all this crap you keep focusing on has created. Kids cannot be protected by the school from catching this virus. If they do catch it, they brush it off faster than other common illnesses they often get. And none of your efforts have done anything to stop this virus. If you do not take a hands-off approach, there's a zero chance we won't litigate. There's zero chance you won't be held accountable. There is zero chance any of you will be reelected or survive recall campaigns. There is zero chance any referendum is not dead on arrival, as you are already told by the survey you have ignored. Mess around and find out. We're done debating.
Anybody else care to be recognized?
Good evening. My name is Kavanna Thomason, and I'm a mother of 10. 8 of my kids attend school here in Prescott, and my kids are ages 18 through 13 months. I'm here tonight as a concerned parent to ask some questions about the PCR testing clinic that will be here in the high school. We can all agree that our main goal is to keep our kids healthy, safe, and in school. With that in mind, I have several concerns that I would like to bring to your attention. Number one, what security protocols do you have in place for screening potential individuals coming into the high school for testing? For example, will there be metal detectors for possible active shooters? How do we know if the individual has a criminal background? Number two, what will our medical screening process be for allowing potentially sick individuals to enter our school? And where will this clinic be located? And three, what is your process for a positive test? I'm only looking for transparency and want to continuously improve our school district. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my concerns.
Thank you. Thanks. Anybody else care to be recognized? Yep. Joe, we got one behind you. That she was coming up to ask us.
Taslyn Magnuson, mother of 2. I live in Prescott. 2 Prescott School District students. The opportunity to have on-site testing will make a significant difference to my family and many others. You've given us a tool through which we can make informed decisions about how to care for our kids. And because the testing is open to families, ourselves as well. I'm grateful. Thank you. Thank you as well for the recent reminder of the symptom tree. I will be honest with all of you and admit there have been plenty of times in the past where I've sent my kids to school with symptoms or encouraged them to go. It's just a little bit of sore throat. You'll be fine by lunch. I know I did this because I had work to do or couldn't afford the time to get them to a doctor's visit or didn't have daycare. That's over now. They're old enough. That was wrong and endangered other kids. Whether my kid gave another kid a cold or the flu, no matter how light the illness, thinking about only our needs isn't enough in normal times, and it really isn't enough in COVID times. The decision to test or not for COVID, of course, is a family's decision. But the decision about whether an individual who could have COVID or any communicable disease can come to school possibly infectious is not. And you as the board, I believe, have the hard job of making our schools a safe place for all kids. And that includes a 10-day absence, which I believe is only a few additional days beyond the policy for an influenza diagnosis. Thank you. I'm grateful. I have 2 questions. Dr. Spacuzza and the board, I wonder why masks continue to be only strongly recommended. Universal masking in schools continues to be a top recommendation for mitigation from the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. I wonder why we are talking about the disruptive and difficult actions like grade and school closures prior to something like universal masking, which has been proven as an important mitigation factor in minimizing the spread of COVID. If you believe that masks as mitigation isn't necessary despite the recommendations of most major public health, medical, and scientific organizations, I respect your thoughts, but I disagree. However, if you hope that by leaving masks only recommended, you will appease some community members, I'm here to respectfully suggest that you're missing the forest for the trees. We live in a county, state, and country that is filled with vast amounts of information we must piece through. Much of it, disinformation and misinterpretation. After attending these meetings for the last 6 months or so and listening to my community members speak, and you as a board debate these questions, it's abundantly clear to me that there are no easy paths through this as a community. It's political, whether we want it to be or not. And it's really hard. The only thing that we can do is model what we hope to see, which is respectful dialogue, continued conversations, and that the individuals who hold power making decisions make those decisions based upon agreed upon understandings of science, public health, and education in a transparent and consistent fashion. I have been encouraged by what I have seen from this board, and I hope you will continue to use public health resources and science to guide your decisions. And while I don't agree with all of your decisions, I respect your honesty and integrity as you make them. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thanks. Anybody else? Joe? Yep, come on up.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Joe Roll. I live in Clifton Township. Father of 6. All of our kids have been in the district at one time or another. And what I'd just like to say is I don't envy any of you for the decisions that you need to sit and make and assess. It's true that there's a variety of opinion out there on how is the best way to move forward. But I'm here to share my point of view with you so that I complete the feedback loop and don't get frustrated because you can't read my mind. So here it is. I missed the meeting on the 21st, had some other things going on. I was kind of surprised that we made a decision to open a clinic. And the reason, I don't have the facts and the context for being at the meeting, but the two concerns I have are a disease risk to the building, the people working in it, and the students, of course. And then the other concern I have is around security, as was stated by some other speakers. But let's assume that we can mitigate both of those effectively. My question for you right now is, what is the benefit of having this on-site clinic, and why would we have one on-site? So I just want a quick understanding of that.
Thanks, Joe. Cool. Well, I think we're gonna get into that and
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's coming up.
yeah, we'll either get back to you, we have the questions written down, and then we'll get back to you personally
Okay,
about that. I don't know if we're gonna be talking about the clinic tonight.
It's not an agenda item, so we're only allowed to
Yeah.
talk on certain things. So some things are, that's what he's trying to figure out.
I'll make sure Dr. Schools gets back
We'll
to
follow
you.
up.
well, was it talked about at the meeting on the 21st?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So there is some greater educational
Yep.
reason. All
Yeah,
right,
and it's recorded too, so if you wanna go back and watch it, you can watch it too.
okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Steve Peterson, Prescott. I apologize for not speaking up earlier and more often, but as conversations go on, it's clear that more and more voices need to be heard. I have 4 children attending Prescott schools. I would like to thank the school board and Dr. Spikuza for how they've handled the issue of COVID in our schools. I feel you have listened to the science, considered the impact on the children, and have made the decision you feel are needed to protect my and other children, while still allowing as much freedom as possible. That being said, I do think there are important issues for the school to work on. I left Prescott in part because I needed to work for a superintendent who I felt I could trust and respect, and who I felt trusted and respected me. For my interactions, I feel many of the staff who have recently left and many who are still here share those feelings. Trust is one of the most powerful beliefs an individual or community can offer our schools. And obviously, that is one of the reasons that people are here tonight. I hope eventually these meetings can focus on how to rebuild that trust in our communities and our schools, and not the political quagmire that COVID has become. Remember the comments about how children are not dying of COVID? They are, here in Wisconsin. And now the conversation becomes, well, they must have other conditions, underlying conditions. How sad to devalue the children based on that. Please continue to follow the science and make decisions based on the opinions of the individual experts, medical experts in our community. I appreciate Dr. Spikuza's, I appreciate Dr. Spikuza's updates and the information that is being shared. I really appreciate having the on-site clinic. One of my children had to be tested. It was difficult to find a place for them to be tested and be able to get back to school quickly. So I ask that you continue to do what you've done. On this topic, you have my trust and appreciation.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else in the audience care to be recognized? All right, thank you. We'll move on to school business. The first item is consent agenda. I'm just going to read this. Pursuant to provisions of section 2550 of the Wisconsin statutes, execute their resolution to participate in the state of Wisconsin's local government investment pool. And that's the consent agenda. So I guess that's the only item in the consent agenda, so there's no point in pulling it out. This will be the only thing. So are there any, I'll adopt the consent agenda. Are there any objections to adopting the consent agenda? All right, we'll consider that adopted and move forward. Thank you. We'll move to item B, board consideration of approving the key factors related to the inability to provide ongoing high-quality instruction due to the impact of COVID.
Good evening. Yes, thank you very much. Tonight is a follow-up from last Tuesday's meeting. At the end of the meeting, I think we spent 2 hours on the last 2 slides. You had charged the administrative team and myself to come forward to you with some indicators on when and if we would have to make the decision on closing schools, a classroom, or a grade. A lot of that had to do with things that are very natural. It doesn't always have to be external variables, but understand that we are complex organizations that have transportation to be able to pick up and deliver our student body. We have food service that is delivering breakfast and lunch to our students, custodians that are working, our aides, teachers, and administrative staff. We have closed schools for many reasons, and there are intermittent interruptions. And our goal is to make sure that we're clear with the community that we have been talking about. We've had to make decisions either because of weather, we've had to make decisions because of busted pipes in the middle school. We've had to stop programming this summer because our LP tanks caught on fire. So there are many reasons that our schools are oftentimes closed. The challenge for us right now is trying to figure out what are the risks. And as everybody is aware, we have different metrics that are out there. You can go to the CDC, you can go to the Department of Health, you can go to the Pierce County website. I'm not here to reiterate all of these. Basically what we're saying is that the warning signals since the beginning of the school year have increased. As a state, we were yellow. As a Pierce County, and with regards to the school district, we did not have many early cases as we started the school year. In fact, they were lower than the time that you made the decision to make masks highly recommended, but no longer mandatory. But things have changed. Since the meeting that we had in August, this Pierce County is at the red critical level. You can go onto the website to identify how they determine those, but a lot of it has to do with incident rates. Again, it's a standardized measure, just like dollars, metrics, inches, standard deviations, however you want to look at it, but it allows you to compare across different situations about whether or not the external indicators are at a critical high, medium, or low status. In addition, they look at the infection rate growth. And one of the things that we do know is that the infection rate is above 1. And for example, if you have one individual who is infected and the infection rate is an RT of 3, that individual spends more than 15 minutes among his or her peers, whether or not it's a basketball game, sleepover, party, football field, basketball, volleyball, wherever they interact, they will have the probability of infecting 3 additional people. Those 3 additional people will impact to 9 and then to 27. It's an exponential growth, which makes trying to have lead indicators very difficult for a district to plan ahead. What we were saying is that internally, not externally, we needed to look at indicators and share those so that our community completely understood in a similar way to things that we were looking at when we make weather decisions. So if you go on our website, you know that we look at the number of inches of snow, we look at the wind temperature, we look at the wind chill, we look at the speed of the wind. 3 inches at noon isn't probably going to close our schools. 3 inches at 6 a.m. and the county plows aren't out, we're going to have to delay or close schools. 2 inches, 1 inch, probably doesn't close schools, but if the wind is 30, 40 miles an hour, we're going to have drifts. So it's both the indicator, it's the context, it's the timing that is going to be the most specific thing for making these decisions. In addition, it's not like weather. All of us have seen the hurricanes that have been plotted coming into New Orleans or Louisiana. They can tell you it's 24 hours away. They can tell you within 100 miles of what it's going to hit. There's a lot of time for evacuation, a lot of time to plan. Unfortunately, that's not in an exponential growth how our school system works. There are indicators that we are reporting to our community. Prescott has been quite blessed. We've dodged the bullet. Compared to districts around us, we have at this time 7 cases and a cumulative amount of 20. That is in no way, shape, or form going to make us have to close. The external indicators are high. We're looking at internal indicators, and at this time, we're not in a situation, but it could change. And that was the reason the board wanted us to meet, to be able to communicate out to our community, to families, on the decisions and what metrics we would look at. We do know that vaccinations are the #1 way for us to put this behind us. It's your choice whether or not you do, but I can tell you that in Pierce County, currently 49% 12 and above are vaccinated. Students 12 and above can be vaccinated. One's probably a typo. My guess, sorry, I apologize, just looking at this now. But then our vaccination rate is 55.2 within the district. Every Friday, we're updating this information on our website. You can click on the information. As a survey was given to our staff, and this was for 3 primary reasons. We collected the information because we needed to know if 90% of our, and in fact, 90% of our classroom level staff are vaccinated. That's impressive. It's higher than our district average, and what it helps us understand is when we're looking at our subpool, the number of teachers that likely would be infected and out for a longer period of time. But let me be clear, it's not just COVID. It can be flu. It can be I have to have a surgical appointment. I'm going to the dentist. I'm going to the doctor. I'm going for professional development. There are many reasons why a staff member may or may not be on site. And so that is part of one way that we can mitigate absences, but it's not the only way. And so our commitment is really threefold. We wanted to make sure that we remain open. In order to remain open, we took steps last week on Tuesday to make sure that we were able to identify and reiterate what are the very common things for which students should stay home when they're exhibiting symptoms, and to make sure that they stay out for 24 hours. It's when there's a constellation of more than one of those symptoms that we're asking families to be able to access and be tested. One of the things that we do know with Highway 29 and also the wait times in Hudson and River Falls now approaching 2.5 hours is that the opportunity to have a clinic on site, and we'll be presenting more information on that once it's approved and it's open. I'm sorry, not when it's approved, when we start to implement. A letter has gone out to every family, and we'll make sure that we continue to communicate with parents about that. It will be located here at the high school, but obviously it is not in the high school. It stops at the vestibule. We're using the high school because it has locked doors and it creates the security barrier that we needed. So we're going to remain open. We're taking every step we can to mitigate. We also know that we want to make sure that our staff and our students are cared for and that they're healthy and that we provide high quality instruction. It's also important to realize that there are times, and the factors on the right-hand side of the slide will tell you a little bit more about our story. And that story is that in order for us to provide high-quality instruction, we need to have licensed staff. If our licensed staff are not on site, we don't have the coverage. We currently have 12 substitute teachers that exist within our subpool. 12. Of those 12, 4 will not teach in an elementary. 2 won't teach in a middle school. 1 will not teach in a high school. Half of them prefer not to work on Fridays. Don't blame them. Some are specific to subjects, music and art, or English. So it's not as if we have, for everybody, the ability to cover. Our teachers have done remarkable things. During prep times when staff are out, they'll cover for each other, giving up their hour prep that they are using to prepare for their classes or to be grading papers and things like that, or reaching out to our students. In addition, we know that we have teacher aides. They are there to provide instructional support, emotional support, and behavior management. Our aides are critical for us to be able to deliver high-quality instruction, and even are differentiated for special education and regular ed. Our ability to deliver transportation and food. Currently, our bus drivers, we have 2 additional subs that have CDL licenses. Every time you drive by Highway 61, you see that there are bus recruiting for drivers. There are bonuses, higher salaries. It is a statewide, it's a national problem in order to recruit transportation drivers. Tim Runquist has done an outstanding job to make sure that we were able to expand those services and to be able to run our transportation fleet. But we are 3 drivers who are sick for any reason when those buses and that fleet can't run. And so it's important. I wouldn't be suggesting to the school board that we would close if we weren't able to run all our buses. But realize that many districts around us have called families at 6 in the morning to say that their buses are not going to be there. And so we need to be able to share with the families that there is the high possibility that transportation would either have to be shifted, put out into the country, or to, once again, have families that are in town to walk or find other transportation. Food service. Maggie Schmidt has done analysis of the individuals and staff. She has additional personnel that she'd be able to shift. She has plans on being able to close a kitchen and provide more resources and cook out of one. They would go to menu changes And then at the next step, they would start to move to bag lunches. Again, these are in response to doing everything we can to keep the schools open, our students here, and provide continuity of learning. But on the flip side, is that if there is an outbreak, and you looked at that, I presented that chart about 3 can infect 9, 9 can infect 27, and so on. If there is an outbreak in a classroom, or we don't have teachers, and we shared last week that as of September 22nd, it was the first time that we had every single faculty member at the high school present. We started on August 30th, and it was 22 days before we had 100% of our staff at the high school. Our principal, Mr. Josh Figge, up to that point, had been in classes and covering not only just a period, but sometimes multiple. Mr. Igo, short of 2 days, has been in classes every single day. We are lucky that at our elementary we have not had or experienced as many absences. Those can be sustained for a short period of time, but it doesn't meet the characteristics of high quality instruction, and our internal rates are really low. So we wanted to make sure is that if people understood that if the peak, if it does start to increase, as it did last October and November, we wanted to make sure people were aware that we are precariously close to not being able to deliver on some of our high quality instruction, transportation, and food delivery. The decision to close for any reason, whether or not it's water, whether or not it's a broken pipe, whether or not it's something else, or it's COVID, is never easy. It's done in partnership with everything we can do and to move personnel to different locations to remain open. But there is going to be a time where sooner or later, if the cases do increase, or we're unable to deliver personnel to keep our buildings open, that we're going to have a short pause. Every day I receive a statewide letter that identifies schools that have closed, gone virtual, reopened. I've been called by superintendents from River Falls, Ellsworth, Spring Valley, Hudson, where they have had to make big decisions, closed a classroom, closed a grade, or made just different decisions. And so I just wanted to make sure that the board and our community was aware that those things are happening in our neighboring districts. At this point, my proposal would be is that if we have to make internal decisions based on the 4 factors that were provided, that we would hit a pause for 5 days to be able to recalibrate and find out what and how long, and gather the information of if we have to take additional steps or close longer. Obviously, at that time, I would be requesting a special meeting so that we could provide in front of the community, answer questions that you might have as school board members, and then we would also try to address how quickly we could get back on track.
Rick, I don't mean to interrupt, but can I just really quickly, when you say pause for 5 days, you don't mean like everything is going to be 5 days. We're talking up to 5 days before we would possibly have to bring the board into a special session.
Correct.
It could be 1 day, it could be 2 days, it could be more.
Right.
I mean, it's not everything is going to be 5 days.
Good clarification. And again, our goal and some of the things that we've been working on as an admin team is we know that some schools have made that decision the morning of. We will do everything we can to make sure that we know that anytime we make a call like that, it's disruptive. It's disruptive to student, family, and people at work. We will do everything we can to try to hold together as far as we can, but there will be a time where, as a staff and as a system, we'll be overtaxed, and we needed to share that. And I think that's something that our community would understand about being overtaxed. And so for families, we'll make sure that they're notified. We have many different ways that we do it: text messages, robocalls, voicemail, email messages, and phone calls. We will make sure that we do it because we understand how important it is to make that no one goes uncovered. I know a lot of people sometimes worry that we're over blanketing or over communicating, but when students aren't going to be able to be on site or it's going to change their family schedule, we want to make sure that we don't miss anybody. So, as we come to the end, is if we do have to close a classroom, a grade level, or a school, we want to make sure that here are some of the steps that we would take that would be kind of cascading our services. One would be that we would verify that Tim and I would be working to make sure that all county routes that are state required beyond the mileage and all hazardous zones within town are still receiving transportation. We obviously will try, but again, I can't tell you exactly when the information comes forward. At 4 in the morning, 4 bus drivers call in sick, I won't be able to deliver on all transportation. So it's very difficult to predict. We'll do everything we can to put that out. If there is a mass outbreak, Tim would be coming back to the board likely to talk about reverting back to de-densifying some of the buses. And again, it would not be for a long period of time, but a time in order for us to get or decrease the amount of cases within our district. In addition, we talked already about just the steps that we would take. One that I omitted is that we would probably alter the menus to make it less prep, and then we would be moving to bag lunches. There are, obviously, this is me out by Malone Intermediate trying to figure out my way to the Maple Tree Grove, but there are too many variables to predict just one outcome. But I wanted to open it up to questions that you have with regards to the indicators that we've identified and how we would try to put those together in concert with the external challenges.
Pat, do you want to start? Do you have questions or comments here?
I'm going to start with a comment, and I know that the last couple of meetings we've asked the administration to come back with what is potentially an impossible task of crystal balling and forecasting any and all different scenarios that would require additional action by the board or closure. So I appreciate Rick and the other administrators developing what we have. I think this is all in the name of communication and transparency for families on how and when decisions get made, even if it potentially isn't fast enough or good enough for some. I appreciate the effort that you guys have put in. My only question at this point in time, Mike, and I don't know if we can answer it, would be if I look at the factors, number 4, the health factors. Is the intent to leave this, open, if you will, to determine when I'm, you gotta be careful saying a metric because we're not identifying a metric. And maybe that's really my question is, do we need to identify a metric? Is it even defined?
On all these 4?
Specifically number 4.
About the
which would be
35%?
Health factors.
Yeah, so on that one, I just wanted to kind of benchmark it against something that has been done during the flu outbreaks. And so it wouldn't be necessarily for us a hard, fast line. It is something that we would take into consideration. And this is where I want to make sure that people understand. There's a lot of information coming in. It's kind of like monitoring the Dow Jones, and we're trying to be able to at least benchmark against where previous decisions have been made. I think it would be specific to if it's across the district, it's a little bit different than if it's in a specific school or a specific classroom. So if a majority, I think for us, what we would be looking at is if 35% of the student body in one classroom are out, and it would at least be a red flag for us to at least start having that conversation.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for questions right now.
Vicki, any questions on the plan?
You can maybe come back to me.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah. So Dr. Guzin, we met last week. We talked about building administrators working to make decisions, shifting staff, some of the things that you covered already tonight. help me understand how they weigh in on making these decisions, because I guess we want to have awareness of who's making the decisions. I understand you're going to broadcast the decisions and let people know, but what weight are the building administrators holding in the decisions?
Well, they have a lot of weight. I think they're closer to the school, their staff, and the students. I think we used the example last Tuesday. It really is dependent not so much how many teachers are out, but it could be that it's the constellation of teachers. We do have some teachers that cut across 2 buildings, and so you have that kind of interdependency. So we do have art teachers, STEM teachers, a math teacher that cut across multiple buildings. In addition, we also know that some classes in the school have fewer students, and so it might be easier for them to cover around prep. But if you have a large class, or some of our, I would say our CTE classes, if those teachers are out, there's not a lot of flexibility in the staff to be able to watch them. So, can we give them a study hall for a day or two? At some point, I think there'll be a tipping point at the site where they say, we can't continue to manage the number of kids. We have either too many study halls. Our teachers have been working too many preps. It's starting to eat away at them. Those are the things that we start to weigh. So I think it plays out differently, obviously, by the developmental areas, but I have a lot of input. We meet on a regular basis. They give me information, both on how quickly they're able to access subs and whether or not it's starting to put a press on the morale and just the physical nature of our staff to be able to deliver.
I'm just kind of curious, I don't know how to phrase this, so I hope it doesn't come out the wrong way, but if your building administrators say, Dr. Pacuza, we want to do it this way, and you say, well, I want to do it this way for whatever reasons, I mean, how does that, is it ultimately just going to be what the superintendent wants they get?
Yeah. Well, I mean, whoever makes the call, ultimately, right, it's going to land on my desk regardless, right? And so the phone calls, the emails, the follow-up, the questions you all have, they usually come to me. And so I have to be, I'm usually asking for their input. I'm asking questions. We're trying to clarify. We're problem solving. So the idea is, and I think just to kind of go back, one thing I didn't mention is, do we have some prioritization also of what we want to try to keep open? And so, it may be that we start to say, hey, this is impacting not just the high school, but it's impacting middle school and high school. Let's get Mr. Igo on the phone, and we start having a conversation of, do we have any teachers at the middle school that can go up? Do we have any teachers at the high school that can go down? Our teachers have been remarkable. They have done, again, this is the 3rd academic year where our teachers have been frontline workers on this. I couldn't ask for a better group that has been pitching in, but I would say that ultimately I do have to make the decision that I feel is justified and in the best interest of the health and safety of our staff and students.
I guess I just want people to understand the background information that you're working with to make those decisions and what's coming from the building administrator. So, are there concerns with licensure between grades? I know some teachers have a license for K through 3 or whatever it may be. Moving people from building to building, can you do that as a substitute teacher situation, or how does that legally work?
Yeah, so, and trust me, the amount of work that we've had to do, and then I'll mention that also on our implementation for keeping continuity of learning in place. As a substitute, licensure is a little bit more broad. Right? It's if it becomes our primary delivery of a science teacher being taught by me or one of the principals, now we're going to start to, it's not so much that we're not able to have students cared for, it's that we risk that we can't count those instructional minutes, which then runs afoul of our ability to be funded. And so now we're at risk of falling outside of compliance, and funding is that we have a licensed teacher that is full-time.
That's all I've got right at the moment.
Tanya?
Yeah, so just kind of putting a cap on Steve's comments, per the information that you provided to us, the collaboration is among superintendents, site administrators, school nurses, and public, Pierce County Public Health. So it sounds to me as if there's a group of people that are meeting, I hope somewhat regularly, to kind of fill you in on where we're at. So these decisions aren't like, unless absolutely necessary because of absences or something that changed, right? These aren't necessarily game day decisions. You are looking constantly and at all the changes that are happening and monitoring the stuff. It's not like we pull together one day and all of a sudden we make this decision, unless of course it's related to absenteeism and stuff like that, which I think is great. And ultimately we hired you as our superintendent. That final decision, and most, just like as in, I would say 99% of things in the school district fall on your shoulders when it comes to management kind of stuff. And then after 5 days, it comes back to us, which I think is very appropriate. And I think we're happy to be kind of pulled in on that, realizing that that might be kind of that last second kind of meeting, but we know that we need to do that and have a fuller dialogue with the community about why we're looking at something like that. I hope we don't get there. I also wanted to comment on the absenteeism and substitutes and stuff. I know in my district I've been substituting too, and I just hope that people understand that when teachers are substituting, they are missing out on their time and their opportunity to provide quality lessons, designing lessons for their classes, feedback for kids, feedback to families, that those two are things that impact our ability to provide a high quality education. And so just because we might be able to cover something doesn't necessarily mean that you know, that's it, right? Like we've got a body in that space. We're still not able to always provide the quality instruction. And I also, and I'm not sure if they are, but I hope people are getting some kind of paid or whatever for substituting, so on their prep.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of work. for them.
The handbook that you approved
Yeah.
last Tuesday does compensate for teachers that give up their prep.
Which is great. And then I just had a couple questions on these metrics. And I guess we've had many people reach out, at least to myself. I'm assuming everybody's got kind of this, people reaching out to them, asking about some mitigation measures. And so one of my questions is, especially when we start to look at that number 4, where we talk about that 35% of absenteeism, and we're talking about shutting down, is there any conversation about re-entering into some mitigation things that we've done in the past? So of course there's masking. People hate it, but that is one of the recommended mitigation measures. Social distancing, which I know we are trying, but is very difficult to do, and there's some things that we're just not doing it in anymore. And I'm wondering if the decision is shutting down versus re-entering into some of those mitigation standards, have we been having conversations about that?
All good questions. Let me start with just kind of mitigation. I want to make sure that we have, Tim did a remarkable job with our buses and just giving me an update with regards to how they are cleaning them after every trip. We're still doing we have hand sanitizer at the entrance of the bus. They do sanitize the buses between routes. All of that was in place, and we continue to do that. Our schools, many of the staff have decided, basically we've been fortunate that we've had very sunny days, and so we've done, and when we can, we're outside. Mike Koika does a remarkable job with regards to our air handlers for when they can be controlled to make sure that we're increasing the amount of fresh air exchange. And so those are things that are in place. But every building's different. And so, probably, obviously, the most challenged is just the middle school classrooms are smaller, and we have higher density. And so there's not much Mr. Igo and his teachers are able to do in order to keep students 6 feet apart. But it is something, that we continue to look at. We continue to give updates, and at this point, we continue to monitor. I think the decisions that you made last week, again, is just to make sure that if in doubt, keep a child out. And it's not just going to be COVID. One of the things that they're already looking at is that RSV and flu, our kids are going to get sick. And so if it impacts our staff as well, it doesn't matter why they're out. That's why it's going to be, that's what makes that decision really tough, is we're going to have to find out when they're ill. Are they out 24 hours? Are they going to be out 10 days? Is going to be a lot of information that'll be weighing on us.
So again, I guess I just would like to eventually have a conversation if we are looking at shutting down for a week or two, what we need to do differently to stay not shut down, if that might be mitigation or whatever that we need to introduce more of. And then I had a question about, again, number 4, and I don't want to use even a percent here because I know that what's going to be used is the district said this percent, and that's not what we're saying. And so I just want to be really, I guess, loose when we say a percent, because it's really based on what's actually happening in the classrooms, in the hallways, at lunches, whatever it is that we're not able to manage. But when it does come to high rates of COVID or other illness, but specifically we're talking COVID in our buildings, and we're starting to look at an increase of students out of the classroom, and we will be talking about how we provide education to them soon. Does that include our kids that are recommended to quarantine and are at home by being highly recommended to be at home, especially our kids that are younger than 12 and don't have that option of vaccination?
And this is where I think trying to keep, going back to our main principle of trying to keep our buildings open for the majority of our students and provide high quality instruction. There will be a tipping point where so many students are out of a classroom that it might not be in our best interest, when we're short teachers everywhere, to keep a teacher with a small set of students. And so what we may have to do is sacrifice a classroom to get them healthy so that we can keep them, another class or another school grade level running. And so those are some of the complexities that we continue to, we could sit here and think through all the situations and scenarios, but it is just, I think part of it is those are the things that we're contacting other schools. Schools are contacting us. I talk with superintendents multiple times a week. Our principals are reaching out to other principals as well. So again, it's not a specific threshold, but it is something that comes into play about whether or not we have to sacrifice a classroom for the safety of that classroom, but also then maybe able to deploy that staff member elsewhere to keep other places open.
And my guess is that at some point, I'm not even going to say guess, this is pretty accurate, but at some point it's harder for us to educate 10 kids in a classroom and 20 kids at home and call it high quality education, or 15 and 15 even. So at some point, I think we have to make a decision for the good of the whole too, hopefully for a short period of time. Hopefully it doesn't happen at all. And then I think that was all my questions. I wanted to say welcome. Thanks for coming. This is 3 weeks in a row, right? Thanks. Thanks for being here. And I think those are my only questions related to that specifically.
All right. Shay, did you have any questions or comments on the plan here?
Not exactly, but I don't think I have any questions right now.
Okay, thanks. Rick, really quick, I didn't see us touching on this, and maybe it's coming in another one, but as far as like from a priority order of buildings to keep open, we kind of talked last week about the K through 5 buildings being kind of priority number 1, and then moving forward. If we had to go to a virtual environment or keep staff on site. Did you want to talk about that at all here, or is that in?
Oh no, this is. I think this would be the place. I think that obviously I would like your input, your feedback. In general, it would be really difficult, whatever decision we make. I think a couple things that we have at least started to try to prioritize is that we understand that students that are in 4K through 5th grade, it is very difficult for them to be independent learners and to be at home, and both that is disruptive for families because they obviously cannot care for themselves. Trying to provide the lessons through technology is not ideal, and one of the thoughts that we were starting to look at is if we were pressed where we were going to be having to close a school, would we look at closing a secondary school prior to closing our K-5s? With the thought process is that we do have a one-to-one initiative at the high school. We do have technology that was demonstrated last year to do virtual. They are of age that they can be at home, and we were able to execute that. We would not be able to do the hybrid. That is the one that just was in, kind of where we would have a smaller group of kids coming. DPI has even recommended that that's not something that they would support as an instructional model. I think our teachers, again, stepped up in an emergency situation, but I think it would be a bridge too far. So I think what we are looking at is that if we were to do anything, we would try to prioritize putting personnel and getting personnel to our K-5 buildings to keep them open if it was a staff issue, right? If it's a staffing issue, that's what we would try to prioritize. And I'd be welcome your input, questions, concerns about kind of our logic, and I'll take your input.
Does anybody have any, I know we kind of thought about that last week, and the priority seemed to be, the lower the grade, the higher of the priority that we want to be on site.
For me, absolutely. Those are our kids that are most vulnerable to learning at home, families that are most impacted, parents not able to work, safety, food concerns, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. So I think that makes sense. And as far as the other services, food service and bus services, I think all of this is really, it's very pragmatic. It's very common sense. It's a plan that, yes, it's driven because of COVID, but it's really a plan that's probably been in everybody's head. As far as if something were to happen, we would have to make split decisions to do drastic things. So having it on paper and having it available for the community to see and just prepare them. Yes, we're in a pandemic, we're in a COVID era, but this really does apply pre-COVID, post-COVID, now, and I think it's a good start. I'm sure it's gonna change, and it'll be flexible, but I think this is very well thought out and articulated. So those are my 2 cents. Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
Yeah, my concern was the K through 5, keeping that open. Because we had touched on it last week. I just wanted to make sure that was still part of what the goal was. And then you said that because of teacher aides, you're looking at hiring 3 more. Are they going to be full-time, or would they be like an on-call type of basis? Are they going to actually be in the schools now?
Yeah, so those are, it speaks to how important a role they play, but we are currently we're still short 3 aides.
Okay.
And so if they're hired, they are needed now while we're open, but obviously it would give us a little bit more flexibility because we're getting through, but again, it's taxing our system. Okay. In a similar way, Dan Huber celebrates 33 years on October 1st, and will be retiring, and now we will be 1.5 custodians short. Yep. We're doing internal transfers, which means that we are hiring, if anybody's out there, for a night custodian at the high school. Why is that important? Because we're moving to indoor sports. And so being short a night custodian means more work is going to our AD and coaches for all the setup that our custodians often do. So those are some of the things that goes back to those positions are to just make us fully have all of our organizational units fully employed.
So
fully staffed, sorry.
So we really do have some vulnerable areas right now that we're hoping don't
fortify, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and then Rick, I'm just going to circle back here. I know we have a little bit of language in the next resolution that we have past this one, but the 5 days, what we're basically saying is school closes for a period of time, and it could be a day, it could be multiple days, but if it gets to where we think it's going to be more than 5 days, you could know on day 1 of closing that it's going to last 2 weeks, because we don't know. But as soon as we know that we project that we think it's going to be 5 or more days, it's time to call a special meeting and get something on the calendar as soon as possible. Could be within that 5 days that we can meet, but we'll meet at the earliest possible time that we can get a quorum at least. Fair enough. I wanted to call that out and make sure people are understood that.
Yep. And the only period of grace I would ask is that as soon as we make these decisions, there's a lot of things to be put in place. So that if we can have 24 hours before because we're getting communication out, we're trying to answer calls, we're trying to make sure that our staff are informed. And it's usually going to be the second day when I'm able to get back to and clarify whether or not I see it as going to extend beyond 5 days.
Fair enough. All right. Those are my questions. So if anybody wants to make a motion, if you have any more questions or comments.
Quick question down here.
Yep.
Maybe you guys already went over this, but so when we're saying keeping the younger grade or the younger schools open, let's say there's like 5 teachers out there, so we would take 5 teachers from the high school and put them down at, like, let's say the elementary school. So then if they're teaching virtually to their high school students as well, I'm just curious how like they would balance out teaching online to their high school students while also teaching younger students, or if that's an expectation.
Nope, that's a
Good question.
really good question. So a couple things that we have to look at is, and that'll be kind of our third installment, because we're going to talk about continuity of learning. But in general, it may be that we are doing it more asynchronous, meaning that the information will be already loaded as a video or in your Google Classroom. You'd be able to access it. The teacher would be having, let's just say, office hours so that you could still check in, but during some hours they're going to be offline because they'll be with other students.
Okay.
We also, just to be transparent, it may be that we're unable to provide all content areas. And so it may be that we maintain the core, and that if there are some other classes, we may use a teacher to cover that, kind of a non-core teacher.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Good question, Shay. So if somebody would like to either take a look at the motion that we have, if we want to go with that, or change it.
I move to accept the metrics as presented to be part of the district's monitoring protocols and to integrate these factors when making a final decision to suspend on-site learning by a classroom, grade level, or school. These factors are selected to ensure that the board and administration continue to keep the safety of our students and staff as our first priority.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion, a second. Is there any further discussion on this one? All right, let's do a roll call. Tanya?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Pat?
Aye.
Vicky?
Aye.
I am an aye as well. That motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move on to the next one, which is, back to my screen.
And we kind of spoke toward it, but it's basically stating that these are going to be kind of fast-moving decisions. Hard to have a posting of a meeting 24 hours in advance to be able to make a call about closing a classroom, a grade level, or a school. Therefore, asking that the board would delegate that authority to the superintendent.
Questions, comments on this one, Steve?
No.
Tanya?
No questions.
She, any questions on that?
No.
Pat?
Only question would be, so we talk about 5 consecutive days. Do we need to add into the motion that or anticipated to be regular, short durations? Are we worried about that at all?
Or can you say up to 5 days in that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
So the reason, and I kind of played around with this resolution.
Yeah.
So the reason I kind of made it 5 consecutive days is because what if we have one day off in October, and then we have another day off in November, and they
Yep.
accumulate over the course of the school year? I mean, do we really, we're not gonna call a board meeting for that.
No, I understand. I was talking about, this week it's 2 days, next week it's 3 days, the following week it's 2 days. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're overthinking this, but that's the situation that I would be referencing here. So maybe some verbiage is to last beyond 5 days or otherwise be regular or anticipated to be regular short-term closures. Maybe we add that language.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess.
No, I think that would be helpful.
it's flexible enough where we can kind of at least not hamstring ourselves into a number, but
Yeah, and I guess I'm also looking at it as, I mean, it could be just one classroom for 5 days and we're coming back together, right? If it's projected beyond. So if you were to start saying regularly, it really could be regularly, considering we've got 4 buildings, multiple classrooms, depending on what you call regularly, So I guess I'm kind of leaning back towards that 5 consecutive days in one area, maybe, or whatever it might be.
one class, one
One
grade,
class,
building,
one grade, one building.
food service, bus
Yeah.
drivers. So we
Yeah,
can
because
talk-
it's really different to me if it's 2 days, because it happens to fall on a long weekend or something. It's 2 days in a 4th grade classroom, and then the next week it's, a couple of days here, and then, it's just. But I'm okay either way, really.
Well, I just want to make sure we're not misunderstanding, right? So if there's ambiguity, you want to try to iron it out here.
I think if we use consistent as a adjective, we have to describe what that means then, because that does start to be, what does that mean?
So the other way of looking at this is pretty clear cut the way it is right now.
Yeah.
If circumstances are to change, we can always come back and, call a meeting. It doesn't have to be in this resolution either. We can, things are so, I hate the word fluid, but that's what it is, that if we kind of left it off the table, off this resolution, it's very clear the resolution is 5 or more days consecutive. But if we start seeing a pattern, there's nothing to say that we can't call a special meeting if somebody wants to, instruct me to do so, or I work with Rick to do that. So we can do that. And that way it's a little bit more flexible as well, if that makes sense. Pat, what do you
I
think?
guess I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with that.
Are we all right with that? Maybe as the approach for starters here?
I am. I mean, that's basically saying at a minimum 5 consecutive days. We might meet sooner. Yeah.
Hey, I do have one other comment though about the motion that we're looking at. Last sentence, shall be called to seek board input and potentially, or potential approval, I would assume we wanted to say. But do we want to say and or potential, or are we looking for board approval at that point?
I left it vague on purpose because it could be as simple as an update and we do not have to take action on anything. However, it leaves the door open if we want to make a motion or approve something that we could do that. So I did leave it intentionally vague,
Okay.
that we don't have to be hamstrung into making a motion to approve or not approve something.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I also think it plays the transparency too, right? If we're having to shut down for 5 consecutive days, I think our community, I think it's good to bring the community together and at least even at a minimum talk about what's going on.
It makes sense, Mike. I guess I want to maybe just reinforce the fact then that we're not saying that administration without board approval has the authority to close schools for more than 5 days. We're just simply saying that we may get called in and we may not need to make a decision.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
It could be an information and discussion meeting. It could be an agenda meeting with
Okay.
with
I get
an
it.
item on it to act on.
And I think it's a comfort level for myself. I mean, if there's going to be an extended closure, I want to be able to update you about, what I see and how long and what some of the solutions we have in place. And what recommendations might you have for us to pursue? So I think that's helpful. I just want to clarify, when you're talking about 5 consecutive days, are you talking about school days? Like if I have to, so is it Friday?
Yeah, I thought about that. I actually wanted to bring that up, but the way it was written was just 5 consecutive days. So if you close school on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday count, and if we're out Monday and Tuesday, we'd want to try to pull together a meeting. If that wasn't the intention last week, we can change that to 5 school days.
I would prefer it because I think it really is about the continuity of learning, and if we're disrupting learning for more than 5 days, then we need to.
We say 5 consecutive school days?
Yes.
Okay. You guys are hard to get a hold of. So that's why we're here. All right, 5 consecutive school days. We want to make that change in the language, whoever reads this. So right now, unless there's further discussion, we can make a motion. Anybody want to make the motion? Are we still thinking?
I'll make it. I move to grant the superintendent the authority to make the decision to close classrooms, grade levels, or schools based on an emergency situation. The decision to close shall be aided by, but not limited to, the district's monitoring protocols and key factors for maintaining the safety of the students and staff. If a closure is projected to last beyond 5 consecutive school days, a special meeting shall be called to seek board input and potential approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we'll do a roll call. We have a motion second. Tanya?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Pat?
Aye.
Vicky?
Aye.
I am an aye as well. Thank you. That motion carries. We'll move on to item E, board consideration of administrative plans by the site to provide continuity of educational services.
Yes, and this is a two-prong. Obviously, as we head into October, we start to make plans for winter. As you know, based on some of the learning that we've done, we wanted to make some of the learning that took place is that we have put forward a plan last year, and we started to talk to you about being able to have virtual snow days. Many districts are deploying this technique. What it would allow us to do is not extend our school year and yet be able to still get the instructional minutes in place. In addition, we would want to be able to make sure that if we have to, and again, it's something we're trying to do everything we can to avoid, but if we do have to close a classroom, a grade, or a school, we want to make sure that we're able to allow our students to be able to continue to access curriculum. So Shay, some of your questions, right, about, if we're deploying teachers out of the high school or out of the middle school down to K-5, then what happens for the high school students? So what we have put together is a continuity of learning plan. It is something that the board has to kind of approve, but it allows us then to, if we do call a virtual snow day, that we're able to count those instructional minutes. The minutes that students are working is about the engagement to a standard, so it's not a minute for minute, so they don't have to be 7 hours on the computer or doing a packet, but it's making sure that students, it's kind of like if you take your car in to be repaired, you're still going to be charged whatever the book rate is on how long it takes to change the front headlight. They'll say the job takes 45 minutes. Most of the mechanics today are able to do it quickly in 15. They're running through and still paying, you're still being charged the 45 minutes. So this is what we're trying to look at with regards to from 4K. As you can see, we've used that word synchronized or asynchronous learning, obviously based on the developmental level of our students from 4K to 5th grade. We are looking at different technology or paper access for our students. And so our teachers have been working on this, our professional learning communities. Michael Kosmowski has been kind of helping steer and lead the work with our principals with regards to putting these things in place. As you know, we initiated Seesaw, and so that's something that's pretty accessible for our Malone Elementary and then intermediate students. We do start to transfer once we get into grade 4 and 5, but we do have Google Meets and some Google Classrooms that start to kick in. So there's accessibility of being able to visually see your teacher and a lesson. And then obviously for middle school grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12, again at this time it would be asynchronous, and this would be with regards to providing the daily core. And then we did talk about that sometimes if they're exploratories may not translate online, or that we're deploying those teachers. Those are some of the things. It's really important for us, especially after the disruption, is to use the technology. Our high schools are one-to-one. Our middle schools and teachers have cameras and microphones, so we do have the ability to have interactive opportunities for our students, and our goal is if we have to, we'll deploy it and continue to improve on the things that we did during virtual learning. So it serves two purposes. It's about any intermittent time and disruption. So it could be like we had to close earlier for a year ago when the pipe burst at the middle school. Had we had a plan like this in place, we could have counted that day. We'll use it for virtual, and then obviously it would be part of decisions that we would make regarding COVID.
All right, questions, comments, Tanya?
Yeah, a couple. First of all, I love that we have something mapped out. I feel like even last year it would have been really handy just to kind of see what this is going to look like, so it's great. Just a couple maybe recommendations or things. We have words on there like asynchronous and synchronous, assuming parents know what that means, and I think we need a space to define that someplace on here. Because even as a staff, like that's a new word for me really in my vocabulary in the last 2 years as well. So I think we need to define it. Also, along the lines of accessibility, I'm concerned when we have 4K through, I think it's up to, I don't know, about grade 5 or, 5 or I don't even know, where it has asynchronous. And so asynchronous means that kids are doing it independently, not at the same time as their class. But where it says instruction may be teacher notes or recorded, and I just really feel like it needs to be recorded until we know that our kids are reading. And this is presuming our families know how to read, which they don't all know how to read, even as adults, and reading English is also might be a barrier too. So I think that recorded version is really important for those kids that don't know how to read yet necessarily. And then my only other thing about accessibility would be making sure that we have captions on our videos for our kids that have that need to be able to see what is being said, or have hearing concerns, language disorder kind of concerns, all that stuff. But otherwise, I think it is great.
Steve, any questions or comments?
Tanya, to your point about recording, you're thinking notes and recording,
Sure.
not or.
I just think recording needs to be part of the deal. Yeah, for the kids that can't read. Because otherwise, if they can't read the notes from the teacher, how are they going to get the lesson? And we can't assume that our families know how to read it to them, or are able to read it to them.
So that would
Is that going to be doable, first of all?
That's, I want to ask if any of the principals or Michael, you want to speak. I just want to make sure that what is being asked that we can deliver on.
Yeah, on the continuity of learning plan, when I met with Janice Mertz from DPI 2 weeks ago, we talked about what does continuity of learning mean and what does that really apply to. And there's a couple different scenarios that are on there, but just some takeaways from that was DPI does not endorse teaching dual modalities. Okay. And what you're looking at here is a disruption where students are at home. And what does that continuity of learning look like? The things that are in there, it says or after them, because it depends on if you have one student home and we reach out to that family and say, oftentimes at the elementary level, they will ask for hard copies. They don't want recordings. If they have devices at home, those are being used by their high school and middle school student. So they don't necessarily have the technology either. So some of this is situation dependent. If you're asking teachers to, in the moment, come in early and record their entire day and then send that out to families before the day starts, that's going to be very difficult to execute. So the asynchronous part is, it doesn't have to be the exact same activity as what we're doing in the classroom. It needs to be related to the same standards. It needs to have, the same expectations of how are you showing that you're meeting those expectations or not. So when I talked with the DPI consultant, they did not endorse that we will put a GoPro helmet on every one of our teachers, record the day, post it, and then expect students and families at home to now watch 7 hours of film. They're also concerned about screen time and what's appropriate screen time. 3 years ago, I went to the conference and we started talking about using this innovation for snow days. The recommendation at that time was if you were going to have elementary age students on a computer, the screen time should be less than 1 hour. And for high school students, the recommendation at that time was no more than 4 hours total in a day. So the top scenario that you're looking at are those kids that are at home. Could be that they're ill. Could be, it could be that they had surgery and now they're out for the next 3 weeks. So this is really encapsulating all of that.
And I think I understand that. And I guess my comment, and I should have been more clear, is really when we have a whole classroom at home.
Sure.
And not like that one
And that's the next scenario. Yep.
Okay, we just haven't talked about that.
Yep.
Okay.
And the next scenario is if everyone is at home.
Gotcha.
Or even the scenario of if the teacher is at home.
Yep.
Who's the teacher of record? If the teacher is at home and they're able to deliver the content from home via technology, that's what this innovation to schools is allowing. So we can decide, as I talked to Janice, she said, as a district, you can decide what level of supervision do your children need. You don't necessarily have to have a full licensed teacher in the room if the teacher of record who's delivering the content is a licensed teacher. So you can think of this as a scenario as today, I have a teacher who will now be home for the next several days because of what's going on in the house. That teacher has the ability to deliver the content via a Google Meet while the students are still on site. So this just gives us the capabilities to do that. And we did last year pilot, K-5 did it during a virtual snow day. One of the snow days we took was a virtual learning day. So we know that we do have the processes in place where we can deliver on that hour and a half of instruction with then the asynchronous learning that goes along with it. And then the high school and middle school last year as they did theirs, that was closer to a full day of learning, but it wasn't a full complete day. And then part of those plans are where we would record it, we post it that day for those families that maybe the high schooler has the priority in the morning and they're going to their Algebra 2 class and their chemistry class and those things. And then in the afternoon, then the younger student could get on and watch that 30-minute mini lesson for mathematics. Yep.
Perfect. And I guess my misunderstanding, I definitely understand. I by no means think that a teacher should go back to recording while they're teaching and presenting all at the same time as a requirement. I was under the impression that we were talking about if we had to do a closure as well. So I didn't see that chart if we had to do a closure, and so I will wait for that. It's on the bottom.
It is on the bottom of it.
But it doesn't, to me, that's,
and it
why
doesn't-
is that way less clear than the top part then? I mean, like, I understand what you're saying, but as a parent, if my 4K classroom's closed now for 5 days.
Yep, and when we put this, and the admin team put this together, this is not what we'd be communicating to parents, this chart. We have separate individual plans based on these scenarios that are much clearer with schedules, with links to Google Meets. That would be the communication that's going out to the families, a much more in-depth. This is just a broad brushstroke of using this innovation to continue the continuity of learning. When there's a disruption, this would be our plan. Now, under each one of these plans, there would be a really spelled out again, developmentally appropriate by the site level that would then be communicated to families.
Yeah, I guess I'm still a little stuck on, if my kids are now at home for 5 days, I would want to know how they're learning. Just like this chart, you know what I mean? So like this is clear for like if my kid's home for a couple of days or maybe sick for a day or two, this is how they're going to pick up on lessons for that kind of intermittent, maybe not the whole class, it sounds like.
Yep.
And I know I read the paragraph at the bottom,
So-
and that's just less clear. And so,
There are 3 charts on there. The
Oh, I
chart that
don't
Rick
have-
has displayed right now is the disruption with all students learning virtually.
okay,
Yep, and you can see it goes back to synchronous. There's a lot of synchronous that's going on if everyone is virtual. The asynchronous is when we only have a few students out of the classroom. So the top chart was for when
Few.
students, disruption with some students. And then if Rick goes to the next page.
yep, which I see now. And
Yep.
then that still says, so if all students are learning virtually,
Yep.
so there's nobody in the classroom, that there's going to be teacher notes potentially going home. And I do think it's not that much to ask to have teachers record those directions being read on something like a note.
Sure.
I'm just saying, I believe it should be accessible in a recorded version, not the whole lesson, I'm not saying the whole lesson, but the directions, because I don't
Sure.
think all of our kids or their families are there to be able to help them with this in the same manner that we maybe would hope so.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Steve?
I don't know if we've hit this, so we're talking about disruption with all students learning virtually versus disruption with some students at home. Is there why is it phrased that way? One says at home, one says virtually. Was it purposeful?
I think it's just trying to delineate when there are a few students that are at home for whatever reason versus when we have to shut down the school for a pipe bursting at the middle school like we had 2 years ago. Now everyone's learning virtually. No one would be at school on that day.
It's probably just semantics and may just
Sure.
want to line that so it,
Yep, we can work on that.
you know, I don't want anybody to get confused because of that,
Sure.
because I would.
Shay, any questions here?
I guess my only comment is that I would recommend that nobody sits through 7 hours of full virtual. It's sometimes even hard to pay attention like in class for 70 minutes. So I would just recommend that even like for 6 through 12, if we are doing synchronous learning, that it's not full 70 minutes or 45 minutes, however long middle school periods are, that there's some like individual works so students can like get up and refocus.
All right, Pat?
More probably mechanics questions, and I would be, so hopefully we don't have to, but should we have to do any of this asynchronous or synchronous, students outside of the classroom? I'm assuming that there was a lot of lessons learned from last year, good, bad, and different. Everything from how grading was done to platforms that students were asked to submit homework on, being different between schools and or teachers. And then, so software consistency, and then I'm sure there's some access challenges. And when I'm talking access, Tanya already had on that part, I'm thinking more, internet, connectivity type access. So I'm not asking for all of it, Michael, but, what are some of the things we learned from last year? Are we ready to deploy it right now? And is there an element of training that, inevitably there'll be a snow day, there'll be something, right? Even if we're lucky enough to avoid shutting down a school or a classroom for COVID-related issues. Is there some sort of element of training? Be ready for this. This is how we use our system. If we get a snow day, everybody log on.
Yeah, some schools, when they've deployed in the past, what they'll do is they'll take a professional development day and say, hey, parents, we're going to run this as though it's a virtual, just so you know what it's like. Now, all the buildings, including K-5, did do that last year. One thing that we've been working on, though, at the intermediate is really working with our students through media, but then even like in 5th grade, where Ms. McDonough will have all of her students log into their computers. We'll go in the gym and we'll spread out, and we will practice like how to do a jam board together. So that way, if there's a time when we're not all in the room, they all know how to manipulate that same jam board, which is an interactive whiteboard on a computer, together. So there are things that we're learning about. That's a Google product, Jamboard. There are a lot of other products that people were using because we wanted interactive whiteboards. The Jamboard came into our system, and now that's pretty much the gold standard that we go to. Another example for like software things, Mr. Figge and I were talking today about Gizmos, which we deployed at the high school last year. We had a lot of student success, and that's an online, for science, it's an online laboratory. So the experiments are set up inside of there, the kids can mix the chemicals, things like that. We still do have some students using that now that we're completely back face-to-face, but again, that's another one that we would be working with our students to get, if we're gonna go virtual, that we would train them again on how to actually work on that platform, because it's not just a Google Classroom now at the high school. Everyone's a little specialized, so there are a lot of different platforms. So yes, that is something that we would work on staff with the students to make sure that they're able to work through those.
Pat, anything else?
No, I mean, it's just more kind of mechanics questions. I'm sure you guys have thought through, how, attendance, right? If we're home for 4 days, how is attendance taken? What happens to grades? What happens to assignments? Is there a grace period when the kids come back?
Yep.
Maybe even a nod right now. Yes, we've thought.
Yes to all those. The grading when we do grade or count the attendance is, did the student engage in the learning activity? Now, some students we know they're going to have connectivity issues. They just, for whatever reason, they cannot get online. So whenever the student does it, so when they get back, then we work with those students. It's sort of like the old days when you missed a week of school for whatever reason, then you came back and you had this mountain of work in front of you. Well, now we start spooning that out to the students, and then whenever they participate or engage in that activity, we can count that as the attendance, even if it didn't happen on that day. Again, it's all about the continuity of learning. Are they being exposed to those learning experiences? And if they are, that can count as a day of in-school attendance, even if it's not on that day.
And yes, it counts, but it's also a plan to get them back up to speed to where they need to be with the rest of their peers.
Right. The idea behind this is that we do the most good for the most students and keep them learning in that, so when they come back, it's not like they missed a week of school.
Thank you. I think those are my questions.
Vicki, any questions or comments?
Yeah, so it sounds, and you said this is basically just a broad overview of what the plans are for each grade level in these 3 different situations. So if a parent is going to get the email, the notification that their student, their school, their classroom is going to be out for 3 days, you've got specific, each principal has specific guidelines, like this is procedures, like this is, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and you've got all that figured out for parents, so that, because each school is going to be different.
Correct. Yep.
So, and all of this has been prepared, it's just not at this level right now, because what we're looking at is a broad view. So if something happens, parents are going to get very specific instructions from each of you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Michael. We can entertain a motion here. Anybody want to make a motion?
I move to accept the administrative plan to provide the developmentally appropriate continuity of learning options by grade level and school to ensure, regardless of the disruption, students and families can continue to engage Prescott School District curriculum.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? That carries. All right, thank you. We're on number 6, recognition of visitors. Is there anybody in the audience that would care to be recognized?
Hello again, I'm Joe Roll, parent from Clifton Township, 3 that are still in the district out of 6. So I'm going to just follow up with a couple of thoughts that I want to share with all of you, our leaders here on the school board. So regarding things that I think are recurring themes I've seen in other meetings that I've been at in recent months. Seems like we have a need for immediate action around bus drivers. Seems like we have a immediate need for some action around subs. To me, with the size of the district, maybe 12 is plenty to have. It feels like it'd be nice to have more. Maybe with the COVID plan we have in place, there's a reason to somehow, as a board, help incentivize both of those things so they're more attractive to prospective employees. But that's one thought I share with you. The other thought I want to share with you is, I'm going to go back to the clinic. So, first of all, I don't know why you would want an on-site clinic. I didn't hear anything tonight to justify that action. Understanding diseases the way I have in my life, especially one that performs the way that Dr. Spicuzza explained with that, what is it called, a 1 to 3 contamination rate, with that pyramid we've seen in that slide. It seems to me that it would make more sense to keep anyone exhibiting any symptoms that might want to get tested off-site and away from staff and students. So that's where I'm at until somebody brings up a really good reason why we would want to bring those people on site. I think you could be more effective at keeping infected students or staff out of the buildings if we incentivize that. And one incentive might be change the attendance policy and get rid of the limit. And just say to parents, here's our list of COVID symptoms. If your kid has any of these when they get up in the morning, we don't want them at school, and we're gonna send them home if they show up here with it. And be strict about it and send them home. It might be unpopular, but I think it'll do a lot more than bringing people with symptoms onto campus. So that's a thought that I wanted to share. I wanted to mention that I really like this cascade discussion that you had around building closures and the idea of keeping K through 5 open as the highest priority. I think there's high value in that. That's something I'd encourage you to look at more if you need to. And I like your continuity plan. I think that that looks like a reasonable, good plan. So that's all I really got to say about it. One last thing is, you know, I've been to hundreds and hundreds of public meetings, both as a member of the public and as an elected official. And I do know that you can answer a question regarding what happened at a previous meeting without violating the open meeting law. And I think what you've outlined tonight is appropriate. Dr. Spicuzza definitely is capable of making big decisions for us. This school board has given him direction on what you expect as we go into the school year. But I want you to know that as these closures occur, if I call any one of you at home, I hope you're fully informed, because I expect you to be. And you should be more informed than I am as a parent. So hopefully in that communication chain, the school board understands the basis by which those decisions you've entrusted with Dr. Spicuzza are being performed. So, but with all that being said, I think we're in pretty good shape. I'm glad we're not considering a plan on what to do if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. I think the sun's gonna rise. I think we're gonna be just fine. And I think at this point, you're properly prioritized. So, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else care to be recognized? All right, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion, and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you for coming.